So is the deal doomed? Well, here to talk more about that, I'm joined by Mariam Memar-Sadeghi, Senior Fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute. Good evening to you. And Iran expert Kevin Lim, PhD researcher at Tel Aviv University and a Middle East and North Africa contributor for IHS Markit. Hello to you as well. Mariam, let's start then with those comments by the former Iranian MP, Ali Motahari, essentially saying, look, we always plan to build a nuclear bomb. Were you surprised to hear that?
Not too surprised, because along the way, the regime, when it's talking to a domestic audience, has indicated as much. For example, when Rouhani was running for president, he chuckled in a TV interview about how he was successful in deceiving the West in negotiations over the nuclear program. Ali Motahari is not an insignificant character. His father, Morteza Motahari, is one of the main ideologues of the Islamic Revolution and was close to Ayatollah Khomeini, is one of the founders of this totalitarian regime. Motahari's comments are taken within the religious context, not too surprising because of the tradition of taqiyya. Taqiyya is something in Shia Islam that not only allows Shia Muslims to lie, but encourages lies and deception if those lies serve religious authority and serve the religious community. So the fatwa by the supreme leader, Khamenei, should be taken as an exercise of taqiyya, lying when he says that the regime is not pursuing the nuclear bomb. But keep in mind, again, this is a totalitarian regime. Lying is at the heart of its DNA. And the comments by Motahari should really be taken as part of a bigger attempt at tough talk and muscle flexing by the regime to pressure the United States into more concessions and basically signing on to a weaker nuclear deal.
Yes, some analysts have described it as the worst kept secret in international diplomacy. But Kevin, what about the claims today then by Israeli officials that the talks are dead? Is that true, do you think, or might that be a bit of wishful thinking on the part of politicians here?
Good evening. Thanks for having me. Just before I answer that, let me just add something to what Mariam was saying. I mean, these sort of statements have been made before by top officials within the Islamic Republic. In 2015, you had the previous president, Hashemi Rafsanjani, actually saying that back in the 1980s, Iran had considered a nuclear deterrent just to preempt the possibility of Saddam Hussein back then also doing the same. So these sort of statements have come before, and what Ali Motahari just said shouldn't come as a surprise at all. Now, with regards to the JCPOA talks, look, I mean, first of all, the talks have sort of stalled over the past 6 weeks. It hasn't taken a step forward, neither has it taken a step backwards, right? So it's essentially, from what we know, at least from public sources, it's essentially revolving around this whole question of the FTO, the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation. And, well, the Iranians have tabled that demand, and in so doing, they have, whether deliberately, but probably more likely inadvertently also opened the Pandora's box of having to address issues that are not just nuclear, but issues that Iran has until now actually refused to address, which have got to do with the non-nuclear aspects of its behavior, its regional activity, as well as its ballistic missile arsenal. But from Iran's point of view, of course, I mean, there is some logic to actually making that demand, because when the Trump administration made that, made that designation some years back, a couple of years back, the point back then was to actually make it more difficult for the subsequent administration to jump right back into JCPOA. So from Iran's point of view, this is linked to the nuclear program because it was meant to make it more complicated to get back to that point. Now, I mean, moving forward, I think I wouldn't, if you ask me, and if I had to put a numerical figure to it, an artificial numerical figure, I'm still sort of, at 51% likelihood that we'll probably still see some kind of deal, interim or partial, or some kind of deal that, really focuses on the nuclear agreement rather than what Biden had in mind initially when he came into the White House to address the broader issues of Iran's broader conduct. I don't think it's dead. I think that the US, though, is waiting for Iran to basically show more flexibility in retracting that demand. I think the Iranians are also banking on the Ukraine crisis and on the US and its allies also seeking more, a greater influx of crude oil into world markets, and banking on that to essentially push for harder demands. And so they're waiting. What I would suggest is, a couple of milestones up ahead. On the 6th of June, you've got the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency's Board of Governors meeting again. They meet periodically, and Iran is going to pop up in that conversation. And just before that, we might see Iran dawdling until then and actually making a decision, or one of either side.
Okay. So you're at 51%. Mariam, if I could bring you back in briefly. If it is indeed true that the US have got cold feet about this deal, what do you think it was that put them off?
Well, at this point, it's an embarrassment because the Biden administration has delivered concession after concession to the regime, and Democrats in Congress, allies in the region, of course, the Iranian democracy movement, dissidents have called that out. And it's a much harder sell even to the U.S. domestic audience that this is a success. With every concession that the administration has made, the regime has ratcheted up its pressure, its attack on U.S. military bases, for example, kidnapping plots against Iranian Americans on American soil, a much harder line domestically against people aspiring for freedom. Let me just mention also that the posture that the United States currently has on the regime is hardly one of wait and see what the nuclear negotiations produce. The administration has already removed sanctions by turning a blind eye on the enforcement of secondary sanctions.
Mariam Sadeghi and Kevin Lim, thank you to you both. We're taking a short break.